welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. Today is Friday, February 24th, and I welcome all of you to the state's premier civic affairs event. I'm Melody Rose, the president of City Club, and I would like to welcome all of you here today. Those of you who are joining us at the Governor Hotel, those of you who are listening on OPB or KBPS radio, and of course those of you who are watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today we welcome Neil McFarland and David Knowles, who will discuss how TriMet, the state's largest public transportation agency, can keep moving forward while financially cutting back. But before we begin the program, I'd like to welcome our most recent member, Bruce Bishop from Kaiser Permanente, to the City Club. Would you please stand, Bruce, and let us welcome you today? We're very glad you joined us. City Club's corporate and media partners are, of course, essential to the vitality and sustainability of all of the club's activities, including Friday forums and, of course, our renowned research activities. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and also to extend our deepest appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors, who this term are Bank of the Cascades, Miller Nash, Perkins Coie, Stoll Reeves, and The Standard. We are very grateful for your support. We just couldn't do this work without you. And as always, there is always room in that august group. If you would like to bring your corporation to our side, please see our friendly staff at the back of the room, and we can talk to you about our corporate sponsorship program. In addition to Friday Forums, City Club offers events throughout our wider community. In March, City Club's new Leaders Council is offering 2 great tours for people of all ages, and I encourage you to look into these events. Nature lovers can take a guided tour of the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge on March 17th to learn how the area's management provides a safe and vital refuge for both wildlife and humans. Pet lovers can enjoy a tour of Dove Lewis Animal Hospital on March 28th, exploring the emergency room and learning about the pet hospital's community outreach programs. Please find out more about these events and others coming up at our website, pdxcityclub.org. And following today's talk, we will be welcoming City Club members to the microphone on the window side of the room for a question and answer session with our speakers. In addition, we invite all of our audience members and guests to locate the index cards which are on your tables, write your questions on them during the forum, and please hold them up when I call for them. City Club staff will collect the cards, and I will be sure to read at least one of these from the microphone because we know you'll have great questions for today's speakers. And now to our speakers. Some 330,000 times a day, someone steps onto a TriMet bus, a Max Light Rail, or West commuter train. While TriMet, the state's largest transit agency, provides a critical service to our region, the agency, like so many others today, is facing a budget shortfall of up to $17 million. To balance this deficit, TriMet is considering service cuts and higher fares, but also more drastic actions, such as ending the city's iconic free rail zone and eliminating single-ticket round trips. Today's speakers will examine the state of public transit during these challenging times and how potential transit changes may affect our community. Today's first speaker is TriMet General Manager Neil McFarland. Neil just celebrated his 20th anniversary at the agency. During his tenure, he has headed up the agency Capital Projects Division, where he's led the development, design, and construction of multiple major rail projects, including the airport, interstate, and I-205 light rail projects, as well as the West Commuter Rail project. He has also helped guide the 6th MAX line, the Portland-Milwaukee light rail project, into existence. In addition to his commitment to rail projects, Neil has advanced extensive capital investments for the whole bus system. He was appointed as TriMet's general manager in 2010. Our second speaker today is David Knowles. David is Vice President and Area Manager for CH2M Hill's Portland office. This full-service engineering, construction, and operations firm has 500 employees in the Portland area and 24,000 globally. He also leads the firm's transit segment in the western United States. Previously, David served as Director of Planning for the City of Portland, practiced law with Davis Wright Tremaine, and served 2 terms on the Metro Council, Portland's regional government. He currently chairs the Transportation Committee for the Portland Business Alliance. And without further ado, please help me welcome today's first speaker, Neil McFarland.
Thank you, Melody. I'm very pleased to be here. I'd also like to thank the program committee for inviting me. I'm very grateful for this invitation. I've attended so many City Club presentations in my 30-some years here in the Portland area. I've seen so many wonderful statesmen and women at this podium. I hope I can do it justice this afternoon. As noted in my introduction, in Melody's introduction, I became TriMet General Manager 20 months ago after 20 years at the agency. I inherited an agency that I think is inspired by a Dickens novel. I call it A Tale of Two TriMets. One is a tale of a world-renowned transit system with roots stretching back to the 1970s with the original transit mall. It's an agency that's an innovator in design and construction and delivering light rail projects on time and on budget, engaging local businesses and creating jobs. It's a leader in customer information, like Transit Tracker by phone, by internet, by text, with real-time arrival information. And in growing ridership, growing from 40 million rides a year in 1980 to 100 million rides a year today. We move a small city every day. As Melody noted, 330,000 times a day someone steps on a bus or a train operated by TriMet. If TriMet's ridership was a city, it would be Oregon's second largest. And for riders and non-riders, we do a lot of good for the region. MAX carries 26% of evening rush hour traffic commuters traveling between downtown on both the Sunset and the Banfield freeways. Westside MAX carries the equivalent of 3 lanes of traffic on the Sunset Highway. Each day, TriMet service removes 4.2 tons of smog-producing pollutants, so we can all have a little more fresh air. We support our regional land use plan that preserves farms and forests. So whether you ride TriMet or not, TriMet keeps us all moving. And in my first 20 months, I've continued to build on that legacy, and I've taken a number of steps to, I think, improve it over time. I changed the way we enforce fares. Many of you know I've elevated fare enforcement over education. I've added fare inspectors. I did this because I know if you paid your fare, you want the person sitting next to you to have paid your fare as well. It's a very simple message: pay your fare. I've refocused on safety. Just days before I was selected to be GM, TriMet suffered its most tragic incident in its 40-year history. 5 people were struck in a crosswalk by a bus in Old Town, tragically killing 2 young women. The agency responded and launched a comprehensive review of our bus operations, beginning with an evaluation of all of our 79 bus routes, including every turn and every stop. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to go even deeper, in effect, to create a shift in the entire culture at the agency. Today, safety is part of everybody's job description and everybody's job evaluation. Last year, every bus operator received intensive safety training that will continue annually. We are on our way to become a model system, again, that is not reactive to safety, but proactive, where we value every employee and every customer, and every employee has embraced safety as a core value of what they do every day. Like the 13 TriMet bus operators who have driven 1 million miles without a preventable accident. I've also changed our investments. TriMet's bus fleet, you may know, is one of the nation's oldest. Our extraordinary mechanics have used every trick in the book to keep our buses moving, even when parts are no longer made for some of them. Now, over the next few months, you'll begin to see 55 new buses plying our streets, providing more reliable and energy-efficient service. And I'm proposing another 54 new buses in the budget next year. There is no reasonable option except to take care of the heart of our system, which are our buses. Now, recall my story of the tale of two TriMets. Let me tell you now a little bit about that second TriMet tale. That of an agency that is slowly strangling from a union contract that desperately needs a reset. Now, I know we live in a blue state, and I'm in a pro-union city. I'm the son of a union machinist. I worked my way through college as a union retail clerk. So I know that what I'm about to say might make some of you just a little bit uncomfortable, and I apologize for that. But decisions have been made over the last 30 years that have gotten us to a place where TriMet union members have arguably the richest health care benefits in the United States. It's a contract so out of date that some of the work rules are over 30 years old and out of touch. And the rich health care benefits aren't just for active employees, but continue on with retirees, as I've often said, till death do us part. These benefits are unsustainable, they're out of step with our peers, and it puts us on a path to becoming a health care agency, not a transit agency. And I want to stress this is not about union rights. We are pro-labor with all the rights of collective bargaining. That's what our operators and mechanics who do an incredible job every day delivering service deserve. This is just about the math. As I mentioned, the benefits are among the richest in the country. Let me explain a bit. $5 copays, no deductibles, no premium contribution, no coinsurance, lifetime health care upon reaching age 55 with just 10 years of service, and it goes on. This translates to a Blue Cross bill averaging $22,000 per year for each union employee, nearly twice the national average and twice that of TriMet's non-union employees. With no change in the year 2020, TriMet will be paying over 50% of its underlying payroll tax and health benefits to active employees and retirees, and that will continue to rise year after year. It's simply unsustainable. The contract with the Amalgamated Transit Union, the ATU, expired more than 2 years ago. You may not know that in 2007, the legislature changed the law to make bus drivers the equals of police and fire, making them strike prohibited. This means we are bound by interest arbitration, a process whereby a third party decides whether to pick the union proposal or the management proposal. Since then, I would say TriMet has found itself mired in what seems like a Byzantine arbitration process. The ATU leadership has used it well to engage in procedural gamesmanship, canceling negotiating sessions, stonewalling negotiations, picketing my house, but we haven't gotten to an agreement. Now, I'm the first to admit that TriMet has to learn new ways of doing business under this law, and we can't blame our predicament for this 2007 law alone. It took two parties to get here over the course of 30 years. We now need the two parties to come together and make changes. We can't afford another 30 years of service cuts and fare increases. Like all other working Oregonians, the ATU members must pay something for their health care benefits, hopefully with a plan that offers strong incentives for wellness. I call upon the ATU to sit down with us at a negotiating table to negotiate a trajectory to long-term sustainable benefits. Meanwhile, I will continue to do all I can to keep the wheels on the bus. As allowed under state law, I froze the benefits to union employees after the contractual impasse step, requiring them to pay for the increased cost of health care, and froze their cost of living increases at that same point. Now, this too is being appealed by the ATU, but my message is simple. We must start now to reform this contract if we are to have a successful TriMet in our future. Another great challenge for us has been the Great Recession. It has impacted, obviously, every business in our region, and TriMet is no exception. We reduced our budget by $60 million over the last few years. We've eliminated 200 jobs and laid people off. We have frozen administrative salaries now for 4 years running, and we have required our non-union employees to pay more for their benefits. And like 80% of the transit districts across the country, we've had to raise fares and reduce service. Now, I want you to know that cutting service is the last place we look to close a budget gap. It's against everything we stand for, but our options are limited. We currently face a $17 million shortfall, and with the history of the Great Recession, there is no low-hanging fruit left to pick. The tough decisions just keep getting tougher. Anticipating this challenge, I launched our budget process 3 months early this year to have more time to gather opinions and options and ideas on how to make up the shortfall. I created a budget task force, 12 really smart people from our region, to help dive into our budget and give me guidance. We conducted an online questionnaire where we got actually 4,800 responses from people, a terrific tool to get some direction and guidance from our writers and our stakeholders. I even held the agency's first Twitter town hall in an attempt to reach a younger audience. I'm not sure that was successful, but I can at least tell my kids I've at least tweeted now. Throughout this extensive outreach, we heard that there is a tolerance, and I use the word carefully, a tolerance for fare increases in order to preserve service. The Budget Task Force also reviewed our fare system structure, and the region's dramatic shifts in demographics and the dramatic changes in our transit system since the fare system was established in 1982. So they recommended to me a major restructuring, eliminating zones, creating a day pass priced at the cost of a round trip, and eliminating the free rail zone. And since we are all sitting in free rail zone, let me elaborate on that for a moment. What used to be called Fareless Square was created in the 1970s when the region violated federal clean air standards numerous times. Fortunately, this is no longer an issue. 2 years ago, Fareless Square became free rail zone, allowing trips on MAX and the Portland streetcar to be free. I'm recommending the elimination of the free rail zone for 2 key reasons. First, it's the math. The elimination would save about $3 million annually. To raise a similar amount would require everybody's fare to go up by 10 cents. To do so, we would expand our low-cost downtown pass for elderly and people with disabilities, and we would partner with Travel Portland on a convention pass program. This would support that important travel and convention business that also supports many jobs in this area and in our region for our residents. Let me also note that the Portland streetcar is proposing to begin charging fares later this year, so it seemed a natural pivot point to forward this recommendation and this conversation. The second reason I would recommended eliminating free rail zone is that it would improve the safety and security of the system. We would be able to check fares in downtown and the Lloyd District and to interact with our riders. This would add a lot more presence and a lot more safety, I believe, to the overall system. As we finalize our budget, we will continue to listen. With open houses, more online surveys, we will continue to talk to our riders one-on-one and our stakeholders in large group meetings like this and small group meetings, because their feedback really makes a difference. I've never been through one of these processes, and unfortunately TriMet has been through a few of them over the past years, where we haven't had dramatic changes from the initial proposal to the final proposal based on the feedback that we get from our riders and our stakeholders. We'll actually release a revised service and fare proposal on March 14th. That will start the third of what I would consider 4 rounds of public conversation on how do we balance our budget. An additional challenge I wanted to address with you today is safety and security. And whether you're a rider or an observer, you probably hear a lot about TriMet on the news these days. Obviously, this group knows very well that what happens in our community will also, at times, happen on TriMet. We are part of the public space. But as police and many social service providers will say, the safety net is cracking. And the issues resulting are coming front and center into the public space. And we are a public space. Some of the issues are mental health, substance abuse, and others, but they do at times play out on our system. Now, we have a responsibility to maintain the safety of our system, and I take that very, very seriously. We've recently expanded the number of officers in our Transit Police Division. We're now up to 62 officers, and they spend 70% of their time on the system itself. We also pay for a Multnomah County Deputy District Attorney to ensure any illegal activity on TriMet, whether focused on operators or employees or riders, will be prosecuted. And as I always say, if you want to commit a crime, we're the last place that you want to do that. We have cameras everywhere, every MAX platform nearly, and nearly every train and most buses. And in our upcoming budget, I hope to add more presence on the system. Now, let me return to the tale of 2 TriMets. Regarding the first tale, we have a tremendous system serving a great community. Ridership continues to grow across our entire system, including double-digit growth on our 2 newest expansions, the MAX Green Line and West Commuter Rail. We outperform any other U.S. transit system our size. We're 24th in population, number 7 in per capita ridership. And borrowing a line from one of our honored guests today, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, we outbox our weight class. There isn't a week that goes by where a city or transit district from across the country and even the world wants to know how to replicate our success. The Federal Transit Administration uses us as a model on how to design and build our rail system and involve the community in building it, particularly small and emerging businesses and communities of color. Transportation Secretary LaHood calls us a template for America. Now, I've been at TriMet, as you heard, for 20 years and spent most of my career building that light rail system. But I can tell you its success is directly tied to the regional partners that help make it happen. First, the federal government, led by a unified bipartisan Oregon delegation, has been one of our keys to success. Metro. Metro, a key partner. The City of Portland, a key partner. The Oregon Department of Transportation. Each of our counties and many of our cities have been key partners in making these projects come about. And while I know the rail system sometimes gets the headlines, don't forget our success is also directly tied to our bus system. Bus and rail, whether it's MAX or streetcar, work together to keep this region moving, and all are important elements of a good transit plan for the region. Despite the challenges of the day that you've heard some about, I am also focused on the future. I tell my staff they have to chew gum and walk at the same time. While we serve our riders today, we must be prepared as 1 million more people will live in this region over the next 20 or so years. And we're not going to build any more freeways or major arterials to carry them. And as we age, at least as I age, lately in dog years, we aren't going to be driving forever. We also know transit will be an important contributor to making us energy independent and reducing carbon emissions. This means transit must play an ever more important role in the future of this region. We're now building our 6th MAX line, the Portland to Milwaukee light rail project. It extends from PSU to South Waterfront over a new multimodal bridge to OMSI, Southeast Portland, Milwaukee, and North Clackamas County. We're building the first bridge over the Willamette River in more than 40 years, and I'd like to think of it as our bridge to the future. Just last week, President Obama in his budget called the Portland-Milwaukee project an integral part of rebuilding the nation's economy. His budget recommended $100 million for the project. The Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail project will create up to 14,000 jobs at a time that we need them most. The project is already paying economic development dividends with the Oregon University Systems Health Sciences building being built at South Waterfront. To do all of this, it takes partnerships, and I'd like to thank some of those partners. Again, our federal delegation, the Federal Transit Administration, the Oregon Legislature, ODOT, the City of Portland, OHSU, PSU, the City of Milwaukee, and Clackamas County, all are partners in making this project come about. You should know that 95% of the cost to build a project like this is funded by our local and federal partners. TriMet's share is less than 5%. And you know, that's been the pattern for all of our MAX lines, and that pattern is very intentional. It preserves TriMet's precious operating resources for operating the rail system and the bus system. And in addition to the jobs the project creates, we get a very highly efficient system as a result of a relatively small investment from TriMet's standpoint. But let me also come back to that second tale of TriMet and the serious threat I believe we face with the legacy ATU contract and the threat that poses to this great system. I'm focused, as you've heard, and maybe even a little hard-headed about addressing this, about sharing the math honestly, and about righting the ship. But it will take more than me. The last 20 months have demonstrated to me this very clearly. It takes a village. Our community must insist that our system of labor relations produce results that protect employee rights, but does so without throwing our riders off the bus. This is not a struggle just between union and management. This is a struggle to restore service, to keep fares affordable, and to keep this region well served. Now, many of you who know me know that I really am an optimist, and I really believe there will be an end to this great recession, and I think we're beginning to see it now. One day we will regain our footing and will begin restoring service, but it will not happen at the pace that we need if this union contract remains in place as is. In the end, meeting the transportation needs of a growing region will require us to be streamlined, to be efficient, and to be fiscally responsible. That's the challenge I signed up for 20 months ago. I'd also like to note that it's the challenge the TriMet Board of Directors has taken on, and I wanted to recognize here today a couple of our key members. Bruce Warner, newly installed as our board president, Tiffany Schweitzer, our senior member of the board, our board vice president. I also believe board member T. Allen Bethel is here, as well as Craig Prosser. I am more grateful than you know for their support, their wise counsel, and their service to our region. So let me leave you with a few key thoughts. TriMet is part of the fabric of our region, and it knits us all together. It's one of the reasons that makes this place great. It's one of the reasons why we live here. And it's one of the reasons many people are moving here. And TriMet has an even greater role to play in our region's future. So thank you, and I hope to see you soon on the bus. And I'll turn the podium over to David Knowles.
Thank you, Neil. Good afternoon. How are we doing on? Okay. Remember when we used to use something called watches to keep track of time? It's a little more difficult now with these fancy devices. So my role here is a brief one, and it is to provide some additional context and observations from two perspectives. One as somebody who works with transit agencies across the country, along with my colleagues from CH2M Hill, many of whom are here today. They're really good at what they do, if I can put in that shameless plug. And also as a resident and citizen of Portland, a frequent bus commuter, and chair of the Portland Business Alliance Transportation Committee. TriMet is a national model of how to create a great bus system and a great rail system that moves people and builds community. And those are the twin objectives that TriMet has been very good at accomplishing. The Portland streetcar, the MAX system, the bus system have all been part of revitalizing our neighborhoods, building our downtown, and converting car drivers into transit riders all over the region. And there's broad recognition of this success both here at home and nationally. I recently convened in my role with the Portland Business Alliance, a group of business people in Portland, to ask them what the city is doing well and should continue doing, and what it isn't doing so well and should change. And the first thing they mentioned, and the number one priority of what the city should continue to do, is to invest in transit. And I think that's a reflection of the kind of strength. It's really a reflection of the record that this agency has with the public. Nationally, of course, we have people coming in to visit us from all over the world to see our transit system. The Oregonian's Christy Turnquist recently noted, and I read this in a paper version of the Oregonian, that, yes, they work for the Oregonian probably. They're happy to see somebody read it. But she noted that Portland is experiencing an extended cool moment. The transit system is no small part of that. You see it in the background of shows like Portlandia, and the, excuse me, sorry, I've lost my place. You see it in the background of shows like Portlandia, and a transit system really is a progressive and vital part of the Portland we know that is attracting conventioneers, urban planners, foodies, and 19-year-olds seeking an early retirement. And by the way, I think you now know they ought to become bus drivers. Think how much that's going to cost you. So Neil talked about two different TriMets, but I want to put a little different spin on the two different TriMets. There are two parts of this organization, and they really do have a different history and a different record. Part of TriMet is responsible for building transit, for putting light rail and commuter rail and the transit mall together. That's the part of TriMet that Neil has been responsible for over the last 20 years or so. The other part of the organization, and this is the much larger part in terms of employees and budget, is the part that operates rail and buses all over the region. And this part of the organization, by contrast with the capital part, is really hurting big time. Not that we don't have challenges on the capital side, but it is really the operating side that Neil is talking about. And this is a problem that's not unique to TriMet. This is a problem for transit agencies all over the country. Most transit agencies, though, get their operating revenues from sales taxes. Without a sales tax in Oregon, TriMet is forced to rely on a payroll tax that's imposed on employers. Other transit agencies have sought to deal with reduced revenues by cutting service as well as seeking additional taxes. King County and Clark County across the river recently did that with some success. In Oregon, the amount of the payroll tax is determined by the legislature. It's also directly connected to jobs and job creation. So as a practical matter, the political will simply doesn't exist to increase a payroll tax in a down economy. And I think that leaves us in kind of an ironic position. TriMet is central to our growth management policies in this region. But without enough growth to manage, TriMet is struggling to deliver the services that are so essential in maintaining that quality of life. So what do we do, or what does TriMet do? I think it's pretty simple to say, as he said, but it's pretty tough to do. It's to reduce costs and increase fare box revenues. And I think it kind of comes down to this, to be blunt, and I'm not totally comfortable playing the role of the harsh pragmatist, but that's really what it's going to require. It's going to require TriMet's operations to move into the 2012 realities economically and technologically. And it's so striking to me that while the capital program, which over its history has been so entrepreneurial and innovative and so successful, by contrast, the operating part seems to be mired in the practices of the past, and it's sapping its financial energy. So there are three things I want to mention that I think can help change this dynamic over time. The first is to end Fareless Square. Fareless Square was a cool idea in the 1970s. I remember when it was put in place. That's one of the few things I may remember from the 70s, but I do remember that it was really neat that you were able to ride the bus for free in downtown. And it made sense then because you were trying to attract people who were choice riders, people who would otherwise never get on a bus. You needed to have this device to get them there. And it was part of our air quality program as well. Well, today, the problem is not getting people on the bus. The problem is getting enough service to serve the people who want to ride the bus in the light rail system. So it needs to change. It's a program that costs $3 million, and as Neil noted, it's subsidized by the rest of the region. Second, TriMet should reduce, if not end, the availability of special fares to certain populations of transit riders. TriMet is not a social service agency. A transit ride costs the same whether you're young or old or in between, and special fares reduce the amount of money available for the entire system. One special service that is justified is the Lyft service, which provides on-call door-to-door service to individuals with disabilities. It's important to accommodate them. It's the law. It's the right thing to do. But the actual cost of a Lyft ride is $29. TriMet charges, thanks to recent board action, $2.50. By law, they could charge up to $4.80, and I think the board ought to move towards charging the maximum amount. So, you know, I know all this sounds heartless. Fare increases really do have impacts on people. It probably looks like I've been watching the Republican presidential debates a little too much. But, you know, these are the times we live in, and it's such a contradiction that while we're enjoying this extended cool moment, we are busy disinvesting in all the things that make us so cool, our transit system, our schools, our parks, and everything else. But it's the economic reality that we have to deal with this year. The final observation is about the situation with the transit union. I really can't say anything more that's more compelling than the statistics that Neil gave you. It really does feel like there's a culture of entitlement with the transit union that's so out of step with the economic realities of today, and frankly out of step with the public unions, their partners and other public agencies who have already made concessions around their health care benefits. And everyone who works for a private employer has seen their benefits go down and their costs go up, and usually both. I just want to make one little point that may only be of interest to lawyers, but it's an important one that helps explain why they're in this position. State law treats transit workers the same as police or fire employees. They are not allowed to strike, and in exchange, management is not able to impose a contract on the union if they reach an impasse. Instead, contract differences are submitted to something called binding interest arbitration, in which the arbitrator chooses one side or the other. This process doesn't work in a situation, which is what we have now, where one party, in this case labor, is defending the status quo, and another party, management, is seeking major changes in benefits and wages. Status quo is going to win every time with arbitrators put in that situation. So the result is that you have an increasingly smaller group of ATU employees who retain their free health care for life, while lower seniority members lose their jobs and the rest of us get worse transit service. I just think that's wrong, and I think it needs to change, and the law needs to change. It's a status that normally only goes to first responders, this no strike provision. It makes sense for police and fire, but nobody is going to die if the number 15 bus doesn't show up in the morning. It's a completely different situation, and the legislature ought to address it. So it sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, and I think from both of us it's a pretty sobering message. But I want to leave you with this. TriMet really is an extraordinary agency. It's got terrific leadership now. It's got a very strong board. I think they're on a path to fix a lot of this stuff, but they're going to need all of our help to do it. It's not something they can solve by themselves. It's going to take an entire community putting pressure on all the different parts of the cost system in order to make these changes. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both very much for your thoughtful comments. If you've written a question on an index card, now is the time to raise it high so that the staff can come and collect it and bring it up to me. It's kind of like the votes earlier. You need to hold it up high until someone is able to retrieve it. The first question for our speaker, as always, will come from our Friday Forum host. Today's host is City Club Governor Leslie Moorhead. Leslie is a consultant providing financial management services for small businesses. She received the club's Research Award in 2007 and the club's Member of the Year Award in 2010. Leslie?
Thank you, Melody, and thank you, David and Neil. We just passed at the beginning of our hour a report, a wonderful report from the Research Board that was passed unanimously. And I would just like to say that I suppose that if we took a vote here in this room now, we'd have unanimous support for TriMet as well. I think we would. Another comparison, I think, between City Club and TriMet is that we talk in City Club a lot about the member experience. And so now I would have a question to you, Neil, about the ridership experience. I really appreciated your comments on security in riding Max and the bus. And I'd like to ask you a cost-benefit question about providing more security. Every time we see something in the newspaper about an incident on TriMet, I'm sure people are always thinking, that could happen to me. But with the concerns you have, the constraints you have, all the variables that go into this, providing security, let me ask it this way. If you were to pull out the stops and try to provide the best security possible, where would the money come from and what would suffer? On the other hand, if there's not security for every rider, every minute of every day, what's the cost trade-off and where's that money going?
Leslie, thank you very much for the question. And it's a really very important one and one that's very timely for us as we enter our budget deliberations. The first thing that I would say is that we do take safety and security very seriously, and we watch the statistics very closely. One of the things that I watch is how quickly do our transit police, for example, respond to any incident. And to date, what I'm finding is the response is terrific. We are right on the job, and we catch the bad guys, and we get them, and we do that on a very regular basis. So our 62 transit police officers are doing a terrific job in that regard. Yep, they are. And the thing that I would say about security, I think it's very important for the sense of security to have uniform presence. Now, that can be provided by our transit supervisors who wear the white shirts and look very spiffy in their uniform, but their job is really to enforce the TriMet code. And that's everything from have you paid your fare to keep your feet off the seat, please, or please make a seat available for a person in a mobility device or who seems to need assistance. So the most cost-effective way of improving the security situation is to hire and to bring on more fare inspectors. I did that with a very big step in a very tight budget last year. I will be recommending to the board again we do that even more so this year, and that we prioritize that related to our budget deliberations. The trade-off, though, is a very real one. For every hour of a fare inspector, that's probably pretty close to an hour of bus service out on the street in terms of the cost of the personnel involved. And it's one big operating budget, so those are direct trade-offs. So it's very important for us to make sure that we provide that safe and secure environment, but we do it in a way that's cost-effective and respects the balance we need to maintain service for our customers. I might also note, I think this problem is primarily on our rail system, because I think our bus drivers, as a general rule, do a pretty good job of maintaining civility on their buses, though that sometimes is more of a challenge than many of you may know. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll now take questions from the floor. As always, members are invited to the microphone to ask their questions. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a privilege of club membership, so I'd ask you please to state your name and tell us that you are a member of the club, and ask your question in under 30 seconds, otherwise you see the famous City Club question mark. If I flash this, please wrap it up. Also, I see we have a long line at the microphone. I will still try to get in at least one question from the tables. Please.
My name is Edward Hershey. I'm a City Club member, and much to my wife's bemusement and your terminology, Mr. McFarland, an honored citizen. Although I would happily give up my fare, at least to means testing. I have a question that relates to the last thing you just said, but neither of you raised in your remarks. It has always struck me as odd that there is not a closed fare system in light rail. It strikes me as a threat to both security and income. Whenever I get on and off one of the trains, I mentally figure out where the fence would be. It seems like it's something relatively easy to retrofit. Why isn't it even being considered?
Well, thank you for the question. And what I would say is that when you think about our platforms for light rail downtown, they're part of the city. They're part of the city's sidewalk. They're part of the urbanscape. To close those off and put a barrier around those, I think, would not be welcomed by the neighbors and the users and the people who use those sidewalks for multiple purposes. So I would say that it is just physically impossible in the central part of our system. But to just acknowledge that I think there is some validity to that idea. I've instructed our staff of the Portland-Milwaukee project to develop a prototype station. This will be at the Bybee station on the Portland-Milwaukee project, where we can begin to install a closed system like that. Now, the other prerequisite for a closed system is an electronic fare system. I've often said our current fare system is the very best of the 19th century. And so we really need to move to a new electronic fare system. And again, I think that may open up some opportunities for some of our stations, should the local community and TriMet find it to be a good idea and actually begin to install some barriers in some of those locations.
Okay, next question.
City Club member Anthony Petchel with the sponsor Bank of the Cascades. My question is around capital projects. You mentioned that 95% of your expansion projects, light rail, is paid for by partners other than TriMet. As we continue to see budget cuts and pressures at the federal, state, and local level, how is this going to affect future developments, and what steps are you taking now to hedge against those?
A very good question. We had one of the great champions for federal funding here in the audience, which Congressman Earl Blumenauer, who has just led a really incredible fight against a bill that the Secretary of Transportation said the worst transportation bill he had seen in 35 years, which was in our House of Representatives. That bill appears to be parked and probably due for a major redo. And I think one of the reasons for that is that there is bipartisan support for transportation funding, for infrastructure investment, and for public transit. And it's not uniform. It's more partisan than it used to be, and that's a shame, but it still is bipartisan. A project like the Portland-Milwaukee is subject to something that the federal government calls a full funding grant agreement. And that's a contract that the federal government signs that promises to deliver funds on a certain schedule, subject to the appropriations by Congress. So the history of the federal government is that once that contract is entered into, the money will flow. Maybe not quite on the schedule that was anticipated, but it will come. So for Portland-Milwaukee, we are on the cusp of that full funding grant agreement, and so I think we will be in good stead. As you look at the future, there's a huge national debate that is incredibly important about the role of the federal government in transportation. And again, Congressman Blumenauer is one of the leading voices in the nation on that topic. And again, our delegation has been very strong in supporting multimodal funding, including funding for transit and roads. So it is not a settled equation if you look at 10, 15 years from now. Indeed, Congress has been really tripped up trying to come to an agreement on a multi-year reauthorization bill for transportation. So there are major challenges ahead. Thank you for the question.
If you don't mind, Chris, I'm going to interject one from the tables. What will be the impact of a Clackamas County vote against Milwaukee Light Rail?
Well, I would say that the first thing I'd say about this is that we have been relying on the approvals of Clackamas County and for the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail project. Occurred actually years ago. And there's actually been two votes, one for the locally preferred alternative, which is the acronym for the light rail design, and the other for the funding agreement. And we have, as a very good, I think, regional partner, have been moving ahead on that, on reliance on that. And we will continue to. And I fully expect that at the end of the day, that Clackamas County will do that as well.
Chris Smith, City Club member. Neil, in transit planning, we often divide riders into two populations. Choice riders, people we've managed to lure out of our cars, and that helps advance the sustainability goals of our region. And transit-dependent riders, people who ride transit because really they don't have a lot of other choices. That's an oversimplification, but perhaps useful if you could address how TriMet is thinking about those two populations as you look at these service cuts and fare changes.
Thank you, Chris. A very good question. And it's one that we do spend an enormous amount of energy and time and work looking at. First thing that I would say is that for whether you're a choice rider or transit dependent, the first thing that's important is service and good quality service. That's important for anybody who wants to use the transit system, but most important for those who are transit dependent, because they don't have a choice. The other thing we do is we look at the impacts of our changes on various groups around the region. And for example, this fare restructuring, I mentioned this in my remarks that we are about, really responded to to our Budget Advisory Committee, absolutely dramatic changes in the distribution of low-income people and people of color throughout the region. Just one stunning statistic that I recall was in 1980, Portland was 16% below the regional income average. It's now about 16% above. And the low-income concentrations have drifted to the east and to the west. So that means that the fare system, frankly, to be as even as it can be, needs to adjust accordingly as well. And so that has been one of the fundamental building blocks of the fare restructuring that's coming out of our Budget Advisory Committee and other work that we're doing. We also make very transparent the changes on various groups. And we have, believe it or not, some very good data at TriMet on ridership. And we can always get better and always will be better, but we share that then as an analysis that goes forward with any of these recommendations.
Peter Fenner, member of City Club. Sort of a question and a statement at the same time. You did mention the answer to my first question, which was, have you considered electronic fares? My suggestion or question would be, have you considered using a debit card arrangement where you could then have lower rates for people who qualified and go through some process to get the lower rates, and their card would reflect that in the billings that they got? But the kind that I'm talking about is somebody would swipe when they got on and swipe when they got off. They would just pay for either time or distance or some combination of the two. Very similar to smart card uses like Easy Pass in New York City and places like that. There are some even when you move into a lane, like a multi-passenger, normally would require two people in a car. It'll just charge you while you're in the lane. If you pull out, you don't pay anymore. So everybody benefits from that kind of a system, and it would allow you to phase in the fareless square arrangement by having that be, well, they'd only be paying for a short time and a short distance, and so you wouldn't be penalizing people significantly by having to pay to get on for a whole day's pass or something like that. Thank you.
An excellent question, and I would say that you're on to something. We think that an electronic fare system will offer a great deal of benefit to us. I would say that the first lesson that I've learned from our peers in the transit industry is to keep it simple, stupid. And so the first lesson is flatten your fares, reduce the number of rules that people have to pay attention to, and then transition to the electronic fare. And by the way, by the time we do that, there's probably about a 4 to 5 year trajectory between where we are now and actually being able to implement such a system. And it obviously requires an investment that we'll be studying with the TriMet Board of Directors in terms of how do we actually get there. The cost is on the order of $20 million, which is sounds like a lot of money, but again, the fare box for TriMet brings in over $100 million a year, so it is something worth looking at as an alternative. I would just perhaps leave it at that, which is that it's a multi-year process, and I think when we implement it, we need to be as simple as we can and then begin to add complexity to it over time if that is the choice of the region in terms of how we do that. I'd also just note that the change in the zone structure that was recommended is because we've recognized, frankly, the zones don't work. They were established in the early 80s as an attempt to be distance-based in their fares, but now and they sort of work that way if your destination is downtown Portland, but less than 50% of our total trips are destined or begin or end in downtown Portland now. We're a multi-destinational system with trips all over the region. And you can take a trip from Forest Grove to Beaverton, 16 miles, and pay the lowest fare, whereas you can right now ride from Sunset Transit Center to the zoo because you cross an invisible boundary called the fare zone, you pay the highest fare. So it's inequitable, it doesn't work, and it needs to change. And that's been the response from our Budget Advisory Committee. And frankly, our current public outreach is affirming that.
I realize that we're at 1:15 and some of you need to hop on a bus back to work. But I'd like to ask, since we do have a long line still of questions and there's a keen interest in this topic, if the gentlemen have a few more minutes to stay with us, I'll continue. Absolutely. Okay, and we'll forgive you if you have to hop up and run out. Next question.
Andrew Mason, City Club member. And without discussing the relative merits or lack thereof of the business energy tax credit. This is a funding mechanism that supported having all high school students in the city be able to get to school. And where my job is to support over 900 students directly getting to school every day, 85% of whom are low income. As I do the math, I'm thinking about the 9,000 high school students across the city and the 1,200 or so graduates every year, low income graduates, high school graduates in our city every year. What is the funding mechanism now that the Betsy has expired that's going to get those low-income folks so that we can still have graduation rates go up at 5 percentage points every year as they did in our city this last year?
Excellent question, and it will be one of the key topics that our board of directors and the rest of us as a community will be wrestling with as we come in for a landing on the budget. The answer to your question is there is no funding mechanism to replace that business energy tax credit. That provided about $2 million a year to fund those student passes. Now, remember that TriMet heavily discounts the student pass already. So it's equivalent almost, just a little bit above our honored citizen pass rates. So marked down dramatically from what you or I would have to pay for an all-zone pass, for example. So there is a problem that we need to address, which is, do we continue the program as it was? Do we tailor the program somehow more directly? And recall that part of the issue here is also that TriMet is a regional agency. It's not just a City of Portland agency. So there is an issue of equity region-wide that also needs to factor into this. So I would just offer that I will put a lot of energy and time into looking for a solution. I have worked with the mayor and the superintendent on that and will continue to do that because I think it's a very admirable goal. But given this budget situation we've got, it's going to be a big challenge. And it may be that we have to begin to think about tailoring to those who need it most.
Looks like we have one last question.
Mike Dennis, City Club member. I will spare my old boss, Neil McFarland, this question and direct it to David. As a leader in transportation in Portland and a leading thinker on it, do you have any observations on our mayor's race and who you see could be embracing the vision you were describing that business leaders said transportation investments should be our #1 priority? Thank you.
Yeah, that was a softball, all right. I think that we're going to continue to have terrific leadership in the mayor's office, no matter who wins the election.
And on that note, please join us next week for the State of the City with Mayor Sam Adams. As we close for today and you all run off to your TriMet transportation, please join me in offering a sincere thanks to today's speakers, Neil McFarland and Dave Knowles. We are adjourned.